And I'm going to mute this guy. Okay. We are recording. This is Scott Brewster with the DC SharePoint Users Group. And today we have Nate Chamberlain on. He wrote the book, Managing Microsoft Teams. I'm going to pull down my copy here because I actually bought this a couple months ago because it's worth the read. And I highly suggest that you get yourself a copy. Packet Publishing is who made it. And if you get the subscription, like I did, you get 30% off on hard copies. I'm not getting any kind of kickback, but I just felt like that was a pretty darn good deal because I've been reading a whole lot off of that platform. I'd like to hand it over to Nate now, and he can tell us all about what it took to write this book and what we should know.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Scott. And thank you, everybody, for showing up. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, I'm going to rearrange a little bit. So just FYI, if I don't see any chat questions right away, it's because I'm looking at a different screen. So bear with me. But up on the screen now, you should see a Mentee survey. If you haven't used Mentee before, the instructions are right at the top. Going to mentee.com, using the code there at the top as well. It's also in the meeting chat. You might scroll up a little bit, though. So basically, feel free to go ahead and continue answering those questions as I start talking about them. But the first one here is just, have you taken the MS-700 exam yet? So I'm trying to get a gauge on the audience tonight as to whether it's something that you're interested in or something that you're mostly just listening in, but maybe not so interested in, or maybe you've taken it and have either not passed it yet or have passed it. So for those of you who haven't, feel free to just take a moment on your mobile device or an internet browser, going to mentee.com and using that code at the top. All right, and while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'll leave this up so you can still use the instructions, but my name is Nate Chamberlain. I work at Centric Training in Kansas City, Missouri. I've been there since November, but I've been training people on M365 for about 5 or 6 years. It's a true joy of mine. It took me a while to figure out that's what I wanted to do with my life. I started out as an administrative associate to a dean at a university. And I liked the challenges that brought in, but mostly, I see all this in retrospect, but didn't see it at the time. I learned that I liked doing the scheduling, I liked booking things, but everything I liked doing was on the computer. Loved digitizing things, and it was a little, repetitive, and it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but I was getting there. And it really hit when my director at the time said, hey, we have this really old HTML intranet, and we have this other thing called SharePoint that we're not using at all. And so I was tasked with learning more about SharePoint to see if it could be a viable solution for replacing our old intranet. And so I spent a lot of time. Oh, yeah. And then Christy has a good suggestion in the chat there. So be sure to check the chat if you're interested in MS-700, but maybe not the exam at this point. There's also a service adoption specialist course that you can take. It's free, and you can pay a little extra if you do want to get a certificate. So really great suggestion there. But yeah, anyway, so I was at this university and I was trying to scale up and figure out, what to do with SharePoint here. Learned all I could, went to my first SharePoint Fest, and that's when it all started. I remember learning about workflows using SharePoint Designer and starting to build my own sites and crazy workflows. I was just totally into it, staying up, late hours of the night, learning all of that. And eventually, of course, that led into a different kind of career. I moved out of that, stayed at the same company, though. It was a university, stayed there, and became a SharePoint functional consultant, just helping to build out that intranet, maintain it, and train people on it. And then I moved into a healthcare system and had my first exposure into SharePoint Server. So that's quite a change going from cloud to server like that, but I did. And I learned all the server administration stuff that I needed to and patching, and had some mistakes along the way. That's how we learn, right? And it proved to be a completely different kind of territory, but I loved it. And I was learning through this position especially that I love to train people, because I started a governance committee, I had an advisory council, and I was responsible for new hire onboarding for all of IT. Just letting people, get signed in to their account for the first time. So simple computer stuff, but then also administering the organization's SharePoint sites and getting people trained and skilled up to be owners and all of that. So through that extensive training program that I led there, I found, this is something I really enjoy, and I wanted to continue that through my next positions. So time moved on, got a couple more positions that weren't quite good fits. There was a business analyst, there was a systems admin again on server, and then finally I saw this position at Centric, and I was like, training full time. So no systems administration, no server. It's like, I'm going to lose some stuff, but I had no idea what I was going to gain. And now I find myself in this really awesome role, getting to train people on M365 all the time. And it lends itself really well to writing books as well, which is really why I do it, just to share knowledge. So let's go ahead. We'll go through these questions now. Thank you to everybody who answered. Looks like most of you who did respond would like to take the exam. A couple of you probably won't. So thanks for tuning in and listening to some of it. You may be interested in the book authoring part. So half of tonight, I'm going to be talking about how to write books, or at least how I've been approached to write books. And I'll answer any questions I can for you. I also want to say we do have Peter on the line, on the meeting. So Peter's my co-author. And if you do have any questions and you pop them in the chat, chances are he might see those as well. All right, so question 2, how familiar would you say you are on these specific MS-700 exam topics? No surprise, I kind of put these in the order that I thought they would be. Managing chats, meetings, and calls, that's pretty high up there. Planning and configuring a Teams environment, policies, team management, org-wide settings, templates, so on and so forth. And then it's always, every single time I ask the question or have the conversation, the networking and telephony piece is down at the bottom because some organizations just don't use telephony at all through Teams. They'll use the audio and video calls through VoIP, but we're not using the telephone system, right? Or ordering numbers or any of that. And then networking, by default, doesn't require a lot in some organizations, and others are very particular about it. So it's kind of a niche topic there. All right, and then any specific questions coming in tonight kind of helps me know any particular corners we should get into that maybe I didn't intend to. So did you have any advanced knowledge from Microsoft regarding specific questions? Okay, how much PowerShell will I need to know? That's a great question. Is there an MS-700 study and reference guide? There sure is. I'm interested in finding out where and how to get the right info for MS-700 so I can get good sources to learn more. And just looking for the quickest path to certification based on real feedback. There's a lot to filter through. That's very true. In fact, there is so much on docs.microsoft.com that'll absolutely help you get there. But knowing what to spend the time reading it's a hard skill to develop, right? And there's no 100% foolproof way to do it. And if you just go through all of it, you could spend months, and then everything changes, right? So I hope I'll give you some resources tonight that are going to help you prep for the exam. Also talk a little bit about our book and how we decided to basically do all that filtering for you to bring it down a little bit. Now, the slides that I'm going to use tonight do have a lot of links in them. So rather than have you try to squint and look at the screen and or use PowerPoint Live, since I'm going to be in and out of my slides, I'm going to have you just have a PDF version of my slides as we go through. So if you want to scroll ahead and see kind of where we're headed, feel free. But mostly I'm sharing so that you'll have a resource after tonight and so that you'll have a clickable resource if you want to go out to any of the links that I'm sharing. So give me just one moment and I'll get that link for you. Okay, maybe 3 or 4 moments, I'm sorry.
Just a note, any links that you provide, I will add that to the description for when I post this to YouTube. Because I know a couple of folks that I work with who wanted to be able to view this, but would not be able to make it tonight. So this will be available on YouTube within a couple hours of finishing the session tonight. Wonderful.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, let me copy this link. I'm almost there, and it's in the chat. So that's 1 month access. Scott, I can extend that. It's no problem. Just let me know. All right, so slides are in the chat. Go ahead and open that up. I'll give you just a moment to find that in the meeting chat and then open it up. You should be on slide 1. That's where we'll start out. Now, you don't have to use the PDF at all. Like I said, you could use it as a resource after if you'd prefer. So Peter, co-author, just said in the chat that he's joining from the UK. It's past his bedtime. Had to tune in for the start. Oh, thanks, Peter. It won't make it to the end. It is quite late there. So thanks, Peter, and have a great night. I have a slide on Peter later.
Sorry, you might want to go ahead and share that again up on the screen.
Oh, yeah. Okay, awesome. So here we are. I'm gonna skip over from our questions. I'll keep those in mind as we go through. I'm just gonna move them off to the side here. Really great questions though that I will cover for you. Now, on the PDF version that you have, both of these icons at the top are linked. The one on the left is going to link you to these slides, and then the one on the right is going to be the link to the book. So just so you know. So this is all about getting team certified, meaning taking and passing the MS-700 exam, and then also the exam guide that I wrote with Peter that covers all the material on the exam and has over 165, maybe not over, maybe exactly 165 practice questions. Now, the exam itself does not have near that many. In fact, it has less than half of that, I believe. So it does give you a good leg up on getting exam ready. So like I said, I already introduced myself. I'll just throw in there that I've passed the MS-700, so in case anybody's wondering. But a funny story about that, when Peter first asked me to co-author the book with him, I actually hadn't. So I hadn't taken the MS-700. I'd been administering teams. I was familiar with it, but I hadn't yet done it. And I couldn't, in good faith, write the book without passing the exam first. So I made sure to knock that out right away. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. The links are all there as well, and on Twitter. So please do if you're on the socials. And then we'll go ahead and dive in here. Let me rearrange my screen one more time. All right, awesome. Thanks, Darren. Okay, so preparing for the exam. So taking the MS-700 is the only thing that's required to get you the M365 Teams Administrator Associate certification. Now, if you're new to certifications, period, there is a fundamentals level, which is like a 1-star level where you kind of get started, and there is an M365 fundamentals certification specifically that I'd recommend if you're brand new to this. Now, if you've been working with it for a while, fundamentals is not a prerequisite. You don't have to take it whatsoever. You can start straight with this Teams Administrator Associate certification. This particular certification does serve as a prerequisite for an expert level certification. So if you were interested in going even further and more complex than what this exam would cover, this is a great step towards that. All right, so the audience for this exam, you don't have to be any particular person. I know sometimes when we go out to the websites for these exams, they're like, oh, you need 6 to 7 years of doing X, Y, Z. I don't always believe in firm numbers like that because I think we all have different experiences that, add up a lot more quickly than others, depending on where you're working, what you're responsible for. So chances are you could have just done it for 2 years. Maybe you're in your first year of working with Teams administration. But if you've learned a lot in a short amount of time, there's no reason you couldn't take the exam. So sometimes those websites do kind of make us feel like, ooh, maybe I'm not ready. But ultimately, it's going to be up to you. And throughout tonight's presentation, I'm going to share just 4 practice questions with you. And I'm doing that for 2 reasons. 1, to kind of engage with you, but 2, because I want to give you a good idea of a realistic expectation of things you could see on an exam. They are not verbatim, but they are similar to the types of questions you could see. And it'll kind of get you thinking, am I ready for that? Is that the level that I'm ready to test at? Or do I need to do some studying first? So anyway, audience, let's see who might take this exam. The first reason you might want to take an MS-700 or really any M365 certification is that you want to prove to yourself how much you know. So it doesn't always have to be for anybody else, right? But just kind of verifying knowledge that you feel that you're good at or that you know something. But it could also be for your peers or your managers. Maybe it's going to lend itself to a promotion or just validation. If you're going to be introduced something, they can say, oh, he's team certified. That might sound a little better in a client meeting than not having that. Okay, being a recognizable line on your resume. So not just your resume, but think about LinkedIn and how often recruiters are using LinkedIn these days to find the right people. Those credentials are searchable. People can just use a claim even and search for people with the certification and just start there. So just getting that out there, posting that you got it on LinkedIn, making sure that you have the badge claimed from a claim, putting it on your resume. It's going to become more and more recognizable. And with the rate of growth we've seen with Microsoft Teams, it's definitely a star-studded certification to have. Do you aspire to improve knowledge and understanding of administering teams? So sometimes it's not to prove to anybody, sometimes it's not because you're looking for a promotion or a new job, but do you just want to learn? Are you a lifelong student, right? And you want to continue to do better and to administer teams the best you can and know all the possibilities. And then the last one here, this one kind of describes me. I've always considered myself a lifelong student. And when I finished high school, I wanted to go to college. And college, in retrospect, I probably would have approached it completely differently and talked to myself in the past about student loans. But anyway, I'm still a lifelong student with or without college, and I do that through certifications. I keep finding things that I can learn and grow from, and then I apply it in the workplace the best I can. So if you do consider yourself a lifelong student too, and you want to keep learning and growing in M365, this is a great certification to start with because it is one of the fastest growing apps Microsoft has ever seen. All right, so just some points about the kind of role that this certification would prep you for. Basically, of course, you would be a Teams administrator. And while there is a doesn't section up here, I just want to make clear that you should probably be familiar with those concepts, but you wouldn't have to be like an expert in them by any means. And then Joe says Teams has 145 million daily users as of April 2021. That's crazy. That's awesome. But yeah, Anton says, thank you, COVID. It's so true. With COVID, the product was just forced to grow super fast, and they've really met a need that we didn't even envision probably 3 years ago. But anyway, so your Teams administrator does plan, deploy, and manage Teams. So those of you who answered in the entry survey that you've had experience or are familiar with chats, apps, channels, meetings, all of that, that's kind of your wheelhouse already. And that's what most of us have experience doing firsthand. Now, this exam does go a little bit further into topics that you may have never worked with, such as upgrading from Skype for Business. You may be born in the cloud company and never had to really worry about Skype for Business Server or Exchange Server, and you've always been in M365, and that's great, absolutely great. However, it does kind of put you at a disadvantage for some things. So prepping for the exam does kind of take us to that place where we have to learn, okay, even though I'm never going to upgrade our company from Skype for Business, I've got to know enough about it to pass. Okay, and then just a little bit of PowerShell. So somebody in the entry survey asked about PowerShell. It was how much PowerShell will I need to know? And I ask myself that question too. This is not my first exam that I've taken or certification that I've sought. And there's more PowerShell than you'd think, but not a lot. Like if I had my way, I'd be like, there's 2 questions that involve PowerShell, and it's really luck of the draw. Sometimes you'll get more, sometimes it's right around 2 or 3. So it's not a terrible amount, but what I'd recommend in that space is just get familiar enough with the basic structure of some of the commands. You do not have to memorize it. It doesn't hurt to practice it though. And our book will kind of walk you through the steps of getting started with all that too. And we just covered the basics to get you through the exam, basically, like what kind of things might you need to know? What are the prompts or the credentials, or not the credentials, but the my brain's drawing a blank here, but what would you have to write for the PowerShell to get through it? Okay, parameters, there we go. And then understanding integration with SharePoint, Azure AD, Exchange, M365 groups. When we see these kind of things, sometimes it feels like, oh, I have to know everything about Azure AD. Not quite. I will say that with, especially like the MS-101, some of that comes in real handy. So if you do take some time to get more familiar with Azure AD, it's really going to benefit you in the long run. It's not like Azure. So Azure AD is just kind of a very specific focus area. So I know sometimes we are Azure and we think, oh, I'm going to be building bots and I have to create all these solutions. And with Azure AD, we're truly just thinking about our organization management. Managing our users, setting up policies, probably working through some security and compliance topics, that kind of thing. So the integration, as far as it goes for the exam, is really like how SharePoint supports Teams and what the relationship is with M365 groups and how Exchange is in the back end of some Teams components, that kind of thing. Okay, and then your Teams administrator role typically also works with other Teams workloads. So you may not be responsible for security and compliance in your organization, but for this exam and to be an effective Teams administrator, it's important to understand the kind of decisions you make and how they affect security and compliance, or the capabilities in M365 to improve your Teams deployment. Okay, and also with messaging, networking, identity, devices, all of that. And again, like we saw in the survey, not a lot of us work with networking or telephony, and we're not that familiar with it. But for the exam again, and to be an effective Teams administrator throughout your entire career, it's just good to learn that stuff and be familiar enough. Now, you won't have to probably ever help as a Teams administrator when it comes to networking or telephony, but you will for sure want to cover the direct routing and call routing topics that are in the exam. You can read about them on docs.microsoft.com, or if you have the book, you can read about them in there, just enough to understand the concept. But you won't be responsible for actually doing it. most likely. Now, I do understand some companies are smaller and you might be the all-in-one. You might be the networking person and the security person and the Teams person. So it doesn't apply to everybody, but for the most part, this is kind of what we're thinking. All right, so let's go on to our next one here. Before we get into skills measured for this exam, are there questions? I'm just checking my chat here. Are there any questions? Feel free to unmute also if you have questions. All right, cool. Let's keep going. So I'm not going to read you these next slides. I know those of you who might have the PDF scrolled ahead and you're like, oh my goodness, death by PowerPoint. I'm not doing that to you. What I do want you to have, though, is this as a resource. Now, the best advice I can give you is to click this screenshot inside that PDF. That's going to take you out to the actual skills measured. I did make sure it was updated for today. However, this changes, I'd want to say like every 6 months. It could be more frequently even. So be sure to always check the current skills measured and not this PDF or slide deck. But for today, we are up to date. Now, the skills measured, as we're going through these, again, I'm not going to read you all of these, but I want you to kind of scan them, scan the headings, scan the topics, get an idea of the kind of things that are covered on the exam. To just kind of identify the areas that you feel comfortable in and the areas that you don't. And this is my first big tip when it comes to choosing what to study and when. There is a ton of content that's going to be listed in the next few slides, but you may know enough to get through a lot of it already. It's very granular. So look for the things that you don't know much about. And what I would recommend is prioritizing those, skipping to the study guides that have those topics, getting ahead to those points, covering those, taking the practice questions on those topics, and getting to a place where you feel at least familiar and hopefully more comfortable with answering questions about them. When you do get to the exam, your questions are probably going to be scenario-based, where it's going to say something to the effect of, here's your scenario, this is what you've been dealt, and it's going to give you a solution. It's going to say, you took these steps. And it's a very simple yes or no on those kind of questions. It's going to say, does this meet the requirements? Does this fulfill the requirements? And you just have to know, yes, that would do it. No, it wouldn't. You don't have to necessarily know everything about it, but being familiar enough to be able to say confidently, oh yeah, that's going to achieve the goal there, basically. All right, and then let's see. So do you need to know PC versus Mac? You don't. You might want to know some device management stuff though. So maybe read up on the device management for if your organization deploys like iPhones versus Android phones, just enough to know like if there's a limitation for iPhones, and there is, but you don't have to know like in-depth PC versus Mac Teams administration stuff, but the device management I would read on. Okay, and then when they said the exam will be updated on May 25th, that means the skills measured or the content. It's going to be both, but if you look at the updated part down below where the track changes is on, they're really just renaming a few things or kind of tweaking it slightly. So honestly, I don't think the content's going to change that much. But sometimes, like when Peter and I were writing the book, we looked at the one that was going to be released because there were significant changes. And of course, we know how Teams evolves over time, so I wouldn't be surprised to see it updated pretty regularly, especially right now. But for now, the changes that are coming on May 25th and that link that you have on the PDF, just look down at the bottom and you can see the small changes that are coming. All right, so skills measured, there are 3 main categories, and the bulk of it is the one that most of you have already answered and said that you feel pretty comfortable of, and that'd be these first 2. So just configuring a Teams environment and then managing chat, calling, and meetings. Okay, and some of you are a little familiar with Teams or managing Teams through probably the admin center and app policies and settings and all of that. But the first piece there, planning and configuring, is a huge topic. And while you might be familiar with configuring a Teams environment, that's also going to be like where we're talking about network readiness and some stuff that many people in the survey at the beginning answered maybe not so familiar with. So again, I'm not reading this to you. You have this. You also have the link to the official skills outline, but just take a moment, scan through it, get an idea of the big headings here, the big ideas. And then after each section here, I'm just going to give you a couple exam or practice exam questions. Now for this one, because it's so big, I chose 2. And then for the next 2 skills measured sections, I only chose 1. So yeah, upgrading from Skype for Business, planning and configuring network settings, implementing governance and lifecycle management, So just some big topics, right? Not your day-to-day necessarily. Okay, so just an idea of an exam question that could pop up in this large section. And go ahead and answer in the chat for our Teams meeting right now, just A, B, C, or D. But where in the Teams admin center would you go to configure guest access settings? I'll give you 15 seconds. All right. So the correct answer actually is C, and it's tricky just the way it's worded there. But this is kind of my foray into saying it would be really wise if you can get like a demo environment, or if you're already a Teams administrator, just taking some time to dive through that admin center, because you will see questions on the exam that ask you about specific parts of it. And it will ask probably not so specifically on guest access, but it's going to say, where would you do XYZ? Or where do you find this? And something to really pay close attention to. And I'm going to go ahead and jump out to a demo environment. Here, let's go to make sure I'm logged in. Okay, awesome. I'm going to assume the persona of Megan, like I do all the time, every week. All right, so here's the Teams Admin Center. If you can get access to this, definitely spend some time diving in. And honestly, you could learn so much just by going through each of these and clicking on everything. That's a big part of how I studied for the exam. I did a little bit of studying up on the topics I knew nothing about, like upgrading from Skype for Business, reading about that kind of stuff. And then a lot of what's on the exam is going to be found right here. Stuff you could just learn, get enough of an understanding of, and then just like with the skills measured, pick the stuff that you don't know much about at all and dive into it. Like if you don't work with devices very much, spend a decent amount of time learning about how to work with devices in an enterprise. Now, what I'd recommend just for getting you started, if you're kind of new to the Admin Center, is look at the big topics for things you're familiar with and just get an idea of how they're structured in the Admin Center. So we don't have to get too granular here, but I'm looking at like meetings, and we'll see things like meeting policies and meeting settings. And that's kind of the first thing you should get familiar with, is that the policies are going to be basically rules that are applied to a group of people. So a specific subset of users in the organization, let's say managers, who might have elevated permissions as opposed to somebody else when it comes to meeting capabilities. Now your meeting settings, on the other hand, are going to apply to everybody. So that's your first principle to know. Settings, everybody, global. Policies, specific people. Okay, and if you go through each of those sections, meetings, live events, go down to messaging policies. You've got all of these voice things, which if you're not working with telephony, first of all, I think they're very interesting, but I might be a little nerdy. But anyway, I think all this voice stuff is really interesting, and you might want to read about this before you dive into it, but they also have their own policies. So again, things that apply to a group of people, but not everybody, unless of course you have a global policy. And you've got policy packages. So after you're configuring all of these individual policies, you can bundle them together and just apply policy packages to groups of people. So I would that's probably just my big recommendation to get you started. Go through here, click on things. I'll show you one, meeting policies, and just see what makes up a meeting policy. Because some of your exam questions are going to say, this isn't working for a client. What should they configure to fix it? And the answer may be a meeting policy. Or it may say we've applied the global policy to a user. So let's look at live events policies. Every single policy has a global default already there. So just taking a look at that and seeing what that includes will clue you up. Now, if you're not in a demo environment, your organization may have made changes, so you won't maybe see the default that actually comes automatically, but that's okay. You'll still get an idea of what comes with it and then what you could change here. So live events, can I allow scheduling? And globally, that's on for this tenant, meaning everybody can schedule live events. Okay, and then, yeah, let's see, external access versus guest. Yeah, Peter said external access versus guest access can be confusing. It's so true. Guests, just so you know, are pretty much invited to be a part of a team. And then your external access is the domains or people outside your company who can even just have a meeting with you or chat with you. So that's another good principle. Okay, and definition of settings versus policies was worth the price of admission. Awesome.
Nate, this is Scott.
Uh-huh.
In order to see all of what you see, do you not need an E5 license? Because I thought that there are components of this I can't see because I only have an E3.
Yep. Yeah. So some features are going to be restricted to E5. So in your case, what I would do, especially since the exam is going to be E5 based, go ahead and go to CDX if you're a partner. So not everybody has this, but it's cdx.transform.microsoft.com. If you are a partner, you can spin up an E5 pretty quickly there. So I won't go through those steps, but that's what I'd recommend, just so that you are kind of testing out in a realistic environment for the exam. Of course. All right. Here we go. So good job. Second question here. When a team is deleted, how long does an administrator have or a team owner have to restore it before it cannot be recovered? By the way, these are real questions from our book. So little preview. And so with this question, while you're answering or taking a moment to read it again, just so you know, this particular question would be related to like the lifecycle management for a team. So that was one of the topics you saw there. Everybody's right so far, so I'm just going to move ahead. Yep, it's C, 30 days. Well done. All right, so the next big topic, remember there's 3. This is the next one, or the second largest. Obviously it looks a little smaller, not so many bullet points here, so less death by PowerPoint, if you will. But managing chat, managing meetings, managing phone numbers, and managing phone system. So based on that entry survey, it looks like the bulk of our attendees today would probably benefit from spending some time on the second column here. Oops, let me go back. But yeah, just learning about phone numbers, learning about the phone system. Now, you don't need to know, like how to set it all up and configure it from scratch. But what I would recommend learning about is what is an emergency address? What's how do you order phone numbers? Kind of walk through that process. What is a service number versus what's a normal user number? Those kind of things. And then also just knowing like PSTN is when you use a phone number to dial outside the company, those kind of things, versus a VoIP call, things like that. So a lot there. It sounds more complicated than it truly is, but just spend a lot of time learning about all of those terms. Call park, calling, caller ID, direct routing. But again, you're not going to be like the administrator of that, but you need to be familiar with those concepts. Okay, and you might be the administrator. Again, if you're the catch-all person for all things Teams, including telephony, congrats. All right, so question from that category. If an email was sent to a channel in Teams and it wasn't delivered, which of the following should you check? So this is a troubleshooting type question, very common on the exam, for it to say, here's a situation that happened, what's probably the cause? Or here's a situation that we need to happen, what do we do to make that happen? All right. See it slowing down in there, but D is the correct answer, all of the above. So this is just kind of something you'll learn as you get through the content and you start configuring settings for Teams specifically. So what can you do with the channel? Can external people participate with it? X, Y, Z, all of that. So all 3 of these actually would be things that you could troubleshoot. Was the message that someone was trying to send too large? Did it have too many attachments, too many images, or something? And then is the sender's domain allowed? Because we can block certain domains from being able to email into our channels, or we can block all external domains. Okay, and then whether the feature is enabled at the tenant and or team level. So at the global settings where we were just looking at the very top as a Teams administrator, we can set kind of the umbrella of settings or the box around the whole organization. But then at the team level, you can actually even get more granular. So it's kind of it's kind of a trickle down, if you will, where if you think about like SharePoint external access, if you make it least permissive, and then a specific SharePoint site owner wants to do something, they can't make it more permissive. They can only go lower. So same thing here. If at the tenant level or the organization level, you say that people outside the company can't email channels inside Teams, then your teams can't undo that, right? Your team owners can't say, oh, yeah, we can. We can have people from Centric email our channels. So all of the above, all three of those are symptoms of that issue. All right. So moving on, manage teams and app policies. This is the last category here. It's only 20 to 25%, but you want to make sure you understand it, of course, because who knows how the questions are actually going to fall in your exam. But managing a team, managing membership in a team, and then implementing policies for Teams apps. So creating your team, this is stuff that's probably pretty common for a lot of us, so we feel good about that. Maybe just understanding some things like how many org-wide teams can you have in one organization? Does anybody know? 249. 2 million. Yeah, so last I checked, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it is 2 million, but it's 5. You can have 5 org-wide teams, and only your admins are going to be able to create those. So your everyday user, if they don't have the right permission, won't even see org-wide as an option when they're creating their private or public team. So yeah, those kind of questions you'll probably see in there. So even though you feel familiar with create a team, make sure you just kind of read the special scenarios like that. Managing membership in a team. So how do you use dynamic membership? You're actually gonna have to get into Azure AD a little bit for that to learn about that integration. And then implementing policies for Teams apps. Yeah, so the app setup, I remember coming up on mine. So if you wanna like configure the left-hand navigation, that one came up, but I don't remember a lot more. You can have like your own company store of apps. So yeah, good stuff. All right, so last question here. So you've been asked to create, this is a long one, but I'm giving you a realistic experience of questions you'll see on the exam. And sometimes you'll see paragraphs like this, but if you look at the mock exam in our book that we wrote, there's actually like a 2 or 3 page case study, and that's common on the exam too. You could have more than one case study where you get this huge block of information about the company and the users inside and their setup that they have now and where they want to go. Maybe they're using Skype, but they want to go to Teams. And then you're going to be asked several questions about that one case study. So this is a small one compared to that, but just some advice when you do get into the actual exam and you get to those case study type questions. What I do, this won't work for everybody, but it works for me. It's kind of how I think, is in reverse. So I go to the questions first. I read the questions about the case study. I see what am I looking for as I read through this massive amount of information, or what am I kind of sifting through? And then after I've read a question or two, I'll go back to the case study and look for those specific things about the setup or about the desired state in the future. And then I'll go back and answer that question. And you can go back and forth, especially if you're new to these kind of certification platforms. They can feel a little daunting sometimes because you're worried if you click next, you'll never be able to go back. But the last one I took, they did a really good job of just letting you know when you get to a certain point in the exam, you cannot go back and change any answers. So that's not a case with case studies. With case studies, you can go forward past the information about the case study, look at the questions, go back to the case study, and you'll be fine there. Now for this one, you've been asked to create a general service desk number that features an automated greeting and hold music when users call. The call must not have menu options, such as press 1, press 2, once the call is received by the service desk. You'll need to create at least 3 of the following items to accomplish the goal. What are the most appropriate items to create? And select all that apply. So create at least 3 of the following items. So that's something you're going to see in the exam too, where they're not going to say specifically choose 2 items. Sometimes they'll say you'll need at least 3, and then you have to choose all. Now those kind of questions get me sometimes, but in this one there are 3. But go ahead and let me know the letters you think you would need. And I'll give you a little extra time on this one. Joe, that's the perfect meme. These are the kind of questions on the actual exams that make me a little nervous sometimes because I'm like, what if I read too slowly? Because you only have so much time, right? Sure, Anton. All right, so we'll go ahead and go through it. So these are the kind of the terminologies I was talking about in that phone system that I would just get familiar with. It is pretty interesting when you start to get into it because you think, oh, what if we did get telephony and we could set up auto attendance and call queues? That'd be pretty fun. But again, that's just kind of my interest. But in this specific scenario, if you did have to create that general service desk number that had an automated greeting and hold music, you would need a call queue. So people would wait in line, right, while they're on hold. And then you assign the call queue to a resource account. Every service number has to have a resource account. And then you would assign that service number, which you ordered, and you'll learn about all that as you go through it, but you would have ordered a service number and then assign that to the resource account. So we're actually looking at these B, D, and E. We're looking at them in the order that I kind of think about it. You assign a call queue to a resource account, and then you assign the, well, you don't really assign the resource account to a service number, but you assign a service number to that resource account too. So it more like makes a sandwich there. All right, so good job, everybody. Let me see if anybody got that one. That one was cruel, wasn't it? It's after hours and we're answering hard questions. All right, so I do have a lot of resources for you because, yeah, 2 out of 3, that's awesome. So I do have a lot of resources because what we're doing tonight is just scratching the surface. We're getting kind of familiar with the exam and what it's going to ask of you. You've got these slides already, which just have the skills measured and a few more resources for you, but a lot of these are clickable. So that's the real value of having the PDF is you can actually come to this slide and click on either of these learning paths. It'll take you out to Microsoft Learn, and you can do that free learning path to get ready for the exam. Now, these probably won't cover everything that you're going to see in the exam. I've done them both, and I don't think they did, but they could have been updated since I took them in October, ? So maybe they cover more than they used to. But notice it's 2 hours and 17 minutes and 2 hours and 40 minutes total. And I'll just show you one. There's Manage Team Collaboration and there's Upgrade to Microsoft Teams. So for those of you, especially who haven't worked with Skype for Business and moving to Microsoft Teams, that would be really valuable for you, is upgrading. And this one's kind of more general, would apply to more people probably, the Manage Team Collaboration with Microsoft Teams. So I'll show you that one. Okay, and if you haven't used Microsoft Learn before, it's a really fun platform. You've got gamification, so you earn points as you go through stuff. But you can start the whole learning path, which in this case is made up of 5 modules, or you can scroll down to learn a little bit more about what's in it. So the first module here, 29 minutes, and it's nugget-sized training, which I love. It's 2 minutes of an introduction. And then when you have another break or some more time later, explore the team's user experience. So we start kind of high level, right? But the other thing is I don't have to go in order. I don't have to feel trapped into a certain cadence of training. I can actually just skip ahead and be like, I know all of that. I'm good. I'm just going to do the summary and knowledge check and move on to the next one. So if I do bad in that summary and knowledge check, I'm probably going to go back and read about the stuff I did poorly on. Okay. And then deploying clients to machines, managing Microsoft Teams, managing apps, bots, and connectors, which sounds scarier than it is. But you just kind of choose what's interesting to you, go through it, choose the topics, maybe just do the knowledge checks. It all helps you kind of prep, and it's all free. All right. So Joe says he loves Microsoft Learn, and Christine too. Yeah, awesome. Oops. So be sure to check those out. Again, those links are in the slides. Those are the 2 most appropriate, I'd say, inside of Microsoft Learn to get ready for the exam. Now, some other resources, aside from those, there is our book, of course, and what's really valuable about that, I think, and what the big selling point is that there are 165 practice questions written by 2 people who took and passed the exam. So I think that would be a really valuable resource for you. And what I recommend to everybody, especially with exam guides, is get the ebook. Because if they structure it like Peter and I did, we put resources at the end of every single chapter. And I do just want to show you the ebook version real fast here. Let me zoom out just a little bit and find my table of contents. That's the forward. I don't know where my own table of contents is. Okay, there it is. So what I really like about this, and I'm going to zoom back in now, is you can click on this. You can search it, obviously, because it's a PDF, so you can search for specific phrases that you're seeing in the skills objectives. And we've written it. We structured the whole book around those skills that are measured. So it's all kind of in the same order that you're reading it on that handout. Okay, so let's say you feel pretty good about planning your migration to Microsoft Teams. You could skip ahead to the questions, and every single chapter has 10 practice questions. And then at the very end of the book, there's a whole section with all the answers where you can see the answer was D. Here's an explanation. Here's a reference link. And you can click on that reference link to take you out to read more about it on the official Microsoft documentation. So we do our best to summarize it and make it simple and clear. And that's the kind of stuff that you're going to want to remember for the exam is the explanation piece. But then if you want to get deeper and learn more, or maybe we didn't make it very clear in the explanation, go out to that reference link and learn all you want to know about it. And in many cases, we sent you to a specific paragraph. So anything that has like a hash mark in it, let's see, that one's step 2. That one would take you to a specific spot. But like this one here, I know that's kind of hard to see, but if there's a hash in it like that, we're sending you to the specific part of the page even that's going to help you out with that specific question. All right, so that's why I recommend the ebook. It makes it clickable, it's searchable, it makes a lot of sense. And if we were to push an update out, it'll hit ebooks way before you'll ever see it in print. All right, and then access to the Teams Admin Center. If you can get that, if you can even just borrow borrow like your administrator's credentials and scare everybody and get the security team alerted. Just kidding, don't do that. But if you do have access to a Teams Admin Center, don't make changes, but go through and just kind of click through, learn what the options are, see what you could configure, and try to get a better handle, especially on those topics, like I said, that you're less familiar with. I do definitely recommend getting into all the settings and policies. Every single setting that you see on there, every single policy option that you see on there, get heavy into those and understand how settings and policies are different and how policy packages work. So that's honestly, that's probably the most valuable thing for me, was having that as I was preparing for it. I used Microsoft Learn. I used all of the docs.microsoft.com that I could find related to the skills objectives. And the Teams Admin Center helped me bring it together. And it's just because I'm a very hands-on learner, and if I can't do it, then I feel like I'm having a harder time learning it. Like I kind of lose attention when I'm reading stuff, and that really helped me solidify it in my mind. Okay, and then there are blogs out there, so more free resources here. These are very similar. The first one is Chris Hord's, and he actually wrote the foreword for our book. It was very kind, and it's a really great foreword as well. So be sure to read that. It talks not just about our book, but about Microsoft Teams as a platform and how it's evolved and where we're headed. So a very interesting read. But he's got an MS-700 exam guide out there, and it's just a link or a listing of all the objectives with links to docs.microsoft.com. So very similar to what's in our book, but on a web page, and it's free and it's easy to click through. Okay, Vlad does something similar. So if you're familiar with Vlad Katrinescu, I'm not sure I'm saying his last name right, but if you're familiar with him, he puts a lot of exam study guides out there. So not just the 700, but you'll see almost anything you want, really. He does a good job keeping up to date with all of that. So easy resources to get out there and click on the topics that you want to study up on more. Okay, and then Scott wants to know if I have an affiliate link. I don't. So I don't need anything for that. So yeah, if you just want to use Amazon, even that link that's on that slide particularly, I'll get you out there. It doesn't matter to me if you buy it from Packet or Amazon. And then, awesome. All right. So gonna take the DA 100. That's awesome. All right, so LinkedIn courses, if you do have LinkedIn Learning, especially if you're like a gold LinkedIn person, I think you get it free. But there are 2 courses out there, both by Robert McMillan. I find him to be a good trainer. He's got a good pace, a good tone of voice for it. So if you want to learn more about either of those, they're kind of similar to what we get from Microsoft Learn, but it's led by an instructor and it's a little more paced, if you will, more video-centric. So manage team collaboration, upgrade to Teams, and then plan and configure a Teams environment, configure Microsoft Teams. So kind of pick your method there. Which way do you learn best? Okay, and then partners can get demo tenants. So for the question about E3, yeah, make sure you use an E5 if you can. If you are a Microsoft partner, you will have access to go out to cdx.transform.microsoft.com. You can get a 90-day or a 72-hour tenant. Go ahead and make all the changes you want, and then destroy it when you're done. All right, and then there is an official practice test. Now, one thing, and I'm not trying to really sell my book here, but the practice test is a significant investment. I'll just show you real quick. The huge pro here is it's Microsoft official. Downside is $99 to $109. So it's going to have just enough, like a real exam, right? It's going to have closer to maybe 50 questions, 60 questions maybe. whereas the exam guide we wrote has 165, and I don't actually know how much it is, but it's not that much. So that's out there too. So any questions, or, you've all had your own experiences with exams and study guides and all of that. Does anybody have something that you would recommend as well for studying up on this one? Oops, sorry, I missed a hand up there. Scott?
Sorry, that was old.
Oh, okay. Shows how much I pay attention over there. Sorry about that. All right. Well, yeah, so hopefully that'll get you started. I know it's a lot to get through, but now the last few minutes here, I just want to talk about writing the book. I know some people have a lot of questions about that. So I had the pleasure of getting to write mine with Peter Rising. Peter is a really great guy in the communities in the UK. I've got his LinkedIn link there. I've got the Twitter link there. And I just wanted to plug 2 of his upcoming engagements so you can get to know him a little bit better. Some of you already knew me, but hopefully you got to know me a little bit tonight. But definitely add Peter to your network, get on LinkedIn with him, get on Twitter with him. Tomorrow, actually, he's going to be speaking, or maybe it's not tomorrow, maybe it's Saturday. That would make sense. But Peter's speaking for M365 Philly, which is a free virtual event. So if you're interested in SharePoint syntax, be sure to register for that. The link's in the slides. And then also he does a podcast with Rue. And so you can go out there and, not RuPaul, the other Rue, but there's a Cloud Conversations with Rue and Pete link out there if you want to go see what they're up to there. All right, so how the process worked for me specifically, and thanks to Anton, put the link there in the chat for Peter, so be sure to connect with them. So the process for me was Peter asked me back in September if I wanted to co-author this book, and I was thrilled at the opportunity. I knew Peter was a good guy, and I was excited about the prospect of getting to write this with him. And then we had the outline and proposal green-lighted on October 5th. So it was just a couple weeks, and we were good to go. And basically, with an exam guide, the outline was pretty simple to put together. We just said, here's all the skills measured. We're going to mimic that because it made sense, right? The people who are studying for it are leaning heavily on that skills measured document. We wanted our book to feel natural and kind of aligned with that. Yeah, and we had our first draft completed in December, December 30th. Now, if you've ever written a big book like this, it's over 400 pages. That's no small task, but when you co-author, that cut the time in half, and we were both really dedicated to a tighter timeline, keeping in mind that Microsoft Teams is changing so fast, and we didn't want to have a year-long writing process because by the end of it, that book's history, right? I can say our book does still have, a lot of relevant information. The only thing that I'd be concerned about is if they change the exam objectives and include stuff that wasn't around back in around December 30th. So of course, we'll have the opportunity to push updates and all of that, but as of right now, all the content would have been updated to the end of the year. Okay, and then we got to see the book cover on January 7th. Packet specifically doesn't have the authors do any of that. They do all that work on their end, and honestly, I'm grateful. But it's so exciting to see it for the first time and to have it feel real, to be able to go to Amazon and search your own name or to search the book title, and it pops up something you've never seen before, and you're like, oh, that's beautiful. And I really do like the book cover they chose for this one. Sometimes in the past with Packet, this is my 3rd book with them, they just choose like a random image and it's colorful and it catches the eye, but it was just kind of like, meh. But this one, it's a beautiful building. It's got a big glass front. It felt kind of cool. So anyway, you can tell it's an exciting process. But then February 12th, our book was published. So we got to see it officially that day. A really tight process if you think about it. But that's kind of how we went through that. All right, now the strategy that we took going into it as co-authors, of course, you want to have your plans laid out. You want to be very transparent in communication. And again, I couldn't have asked for a better co-author. Peter was really communicative, and we had a good, camaraderie, if you will, going back and forth. We used LinkedIn at first. We used Teams as well, especially once we got into it. Now, our goal is 14 chapters, and we plan to have 1 chapter draft completed every 10 days. And since we were splitting it 50-50, we would both have a chapter done every 10 days. So 2 chapters every 10 days. Okay, and the idea was that we'd have over 400 pages and the first draft in 70 days based on that math. So I'm just using some math from bullet 2 to bullet 3 there. So we're looking at just over 2 months to get that entire first draft done. So during the process, how this works is we submit first drafts that nobody else has seen. We ran them by each other, but then they went off to Packet. And Packet had two phases, basically, where we have the editorial review, and they'll go and do all the grammar and all that nice layout stuff. And then they send it to technical reviewers, and we had a really great team of technical reviewers who look for, of course, the technical components, maybe do some testing for us, make sure everything's accurate. And I'll share their names here in a moment, but we had 4 people do that for us, and we're really grateful to have them on board, helping us make it the best it could be. So how it worked, Peter wrote chapters 1 through 7, I wrote chapters 8 through 14, and then we shared the mock exam and all the answers and explanations section. Okay, so overall, we started on October 5th. We published on February 12th, which put it right at around 4 months. Okay, so this is kind of just a screenshot here of what our team looked like. Really simple. We only had a general channel. We didn't overcomplicate this. We didn't use the wiki. I should have deleted it, but we just had a channel conversation thread that we didn't use. The most important piece for us was files. So we really just used the SharePoint and the chat and some of that to get through, in LinkedIn, of course. But for our files, we had all of our chapters out there, and we had it assigned to either both of us or one of us, and we just kind of built it over time. So we still have that as a resource now, even though the book's finished. And if we did want to make updates, we just pick up right where we left off. All right, so I'll pause here for any questions before we get on to the last couple slides here, but any questions about that writing process or how I co-authored with Peter?
It's not coming to mind. I really love what I'm witnessing here and seeing how you structured the book. It says a lot about quality. I'm really fascinated by the thought process that went into this. It is amazing to me.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. A lot of love went into it. Helps when you have like a positive co-author, and we just enjoyed doing what we're doing, and that kind of gets put into the book too. All right, yeah, metadata. Darren says metadata. He saw my files tab. All right, so if you are interested in writing, first of all, always use me as a resource. I'd be happy to help you out just with any questions that do come up as you're getting into the process. But if you are interested, there's lots of publishers out there. You could go with Packet like we did, and they're always looking for the next tech authors. So be sure to use these links on this slide. Each one of these kind of takes you to a similar landing page where you're going to input some information, put in your proposal details, that kind of thing. Some want more detail than others, like a really thought out form, and others just want your general concept. But Packet, Pearson, and Apress are all technical publishers, and there's probably even more that I'm not familiar with. But feel free to start there. You can pitch your idea to all 3 and see if anybody offers. But how it worked for me was they always reached out first. So as you become more busy in the community and speaking at events and maybe self-publishing, and actually that's how I got started, but maybe you self-publish some things, people read that book or find it somewhere or search for it and find you authored something similar, you get that exposure, and then people start reaching out to you instead. So that's kind of how I went with Packet and Pearson. But then self-publishing is really where I started. And at first it was just kind of a silly thing because my very first book was the ABCs of SharePoint. And it wasn't meant to be anything too serious. I came up with one feature or concept in SharePoint for every letter of the alphabet. And then I made a blog post. It was my 100th blog post. I was excited about it. And then I was like, I need to do something a little bigger than just a blog post that's fun for my number 100. So I went to this KDP or Kindle Direct Publishing, and I, formatted my own book on my own using Word. I didn't get too complicated there. I put together this ABCs of SharePoint book that was a little bit more in depth than my blog post. And it's a small book, but it was a lot of fun to put together. And it's so cool to hold it in your hand when you're all done. But completely self-published, you don't pay a thing to actually do it unless you want to buy copies of your book. But you can completely self-publish, put it out there. People can buy your book, and it's out there, completely controlled by you. You want to make an update, you go ahead and do it. So great way to get started, great way to get exposure. That's how I got started, and now I've written 3 for Packet. All right, so I do want to give some special thanks here, especially to my co-author, Peter Risen. I could never have gotten here without him, of course. And I'm so humbled to have been asked to take part in this. Also to Chris Ford, who not only has an awesome blog that's going to help you out with the MS-700 that I mentioned earlier, but also he wrote an amazing foreword for our book. And if you don't know Chris, he's huge in the Teams community, especially, also from the UK. Very great guy. Okay, and then our technical reviewers, amazing work on their part. Imagine getting all these chapters from a book and then having to read them all and go through and make sure everything works as they're expected. But we had Linus Cansby, Adam Deltinger, Amanda Sterner, and Mike Swantek. They were all amazing to work with. Got things turned back so quickly. Like overall, we had a 4-month time span there. And they were so great, each of them, at taking their part of the book and turning it around in a short time. So really appreciate their attention to detail and work on that. And then, of course, I couldn't do it without Packet either. So those publishers and all the editorial team work really hard to not only meet the same kind of deadlines we were aspiring to, but to create a quality book. So really proud to work with them 3 times now. Okay, and then, of course, everybody in your user group, it's amazing to get to connect with people across the country using Teams, of course. So thank you for having me. This has been a great experience to reconnect a little bit, especially since we haven't seen each other in so long. And then also to the members, there is no user group without members, and knowing that you have this interest in professional development and networking makes it all worth it for everybody. So thank you to everybody who took the time out of your evening to learn a little bit more about the MS-700 and the book that followed. All right, that's all I have. I will stick around for questions, of course, but one more time, thank you everybody who came tonight.
If anyone has a question, please do the raise hand thing so that Nate can call on you. It looks like you do have a couple in the chat.
Okay, let me hop over there real quick. Okay, Measure Up, any good for studying for the MS-700? Somebody just mentioned the Measure Up to me, and I can't remember who it was. Gosh, I can't remember, but the questions, who was I talking to? Oh yeah, okay. So yeah, I just had a community friend I met with on Wednesday, and we were talking about studying for exams. And in this case, it was an Azure thing, so I can't speak to MS-700 for Measure Up. But this was the Azure, I want to say 100 or 400. I don't really know. I don't do a lot of the Azure stuff, but for him, he found that Measure Up actually was just way off on the reality when it comes to the exam. Like the questions were not that similar, and he went through the whole thing, did all the Measure Up stuff, and found that it was just very scratching the surface. And when he got to the exam, felt that it didn't help him at all. Now, I'm not saying anything about Measure Up. In fact, I've never used it. But when you said that, or when you asked that question, I was like, okay, someone just mentioned that to me. So that was for one exam. I'm sure there's quality content out there for others, but I just can't speak to it myself. Awesome. Yeah, thank you, everybody.
If there aren't any other questions, Paul said 30% off fire sale. It reminded me that, yes, if you get a Packet subscription, they give you 30% off on any of the hardbound copies of the books that you want. I bought 3 books at the same time when I bought Nate's. As soon as I had gotten the subscription, and I started watching or reading the ebook until it arrived in the mail. It is a quality product. And I'd like you to take some time to check out Centric, see what they offer. It looks like a lot of good training comes out of them. I've seen quite a few of their webinars. You can find them on LinkedIn, and they post a lot. But I'd like to just say thank you again to Nate. This has been eye-opening. I've really enjoyed this session a lot.
Well, thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And with that, I'm going to stop recording, and then you guys can continue to speak if you've got anything else to add.
All right.